It's 2:47 in the morning. You've checked everything. The diaper is clean, the bottle is empty, the temperature in the room is exactly what every article said it should be. You've fed them, you've rocked them, you've done the thing that worked last Tuesday and the Thursday before that. And they're still crying. Not a sick cry, not a hungry cry, not the sharp shriek of something wrong. Just crying, sustained, relentless, completely unreasonable. And in the dark, somewhere between exhausted and desperate, you land on the only explanation left. There is no reason. Most parents do. It's the conclusion that makes the most sense when every other explanation has been eliminated. And it's also the conclusion that has been studied, measured, and quietly overturned by researchers in sleep labs and neuroscience departments over the last 30 years. There is always a reason. You just need to know where to look. For most of the 20th century, medical advice on nighttime infant crying pointed in one direction. Let them cry it out. Don't respond too quickly. You'll spoil them. You'll reinforce the behaviour. You'll teach them that crying works. It was confident advice. It was repeated by paediatricians, passed down through generations, printed in best-selling books. And it was built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what a crying baby's brain is actually doing. Because here's what the advice assumed, that a baby crying at night is making a choice, a strategic behaviour with an expected outcome, a negotiation. What neuroscience has since shown is something completely different. A baby crying in the dark isn't negotiating. They're not manipulating. They're not testing boundaries. They're experiencing something much more urgent and much more biological than anyone in 1975 had the tools to measure. In 2012, researchers at the University of Notre Dame published findings from what they called the Mother-Baby Behavioral Sleep Laboratory. They had been tracking infants across multiple cultures, not just Western, sleep-trained babies, but infants in hunter-gatherer communities, traditional agrarian societies, co-sleeping households across Asia and South America. And what they found, published in the journal Infant and Child Development, was that nighttime waking and nighttime crying is not a developmental problem. It is developmentally normal for a human infant to wake and cry at night. Across every culture studied, the question the researchers were actually asking was, why? The answer begins in the brain. A newborn's nervous system arrives in the world fundamentally incomplete, not broken. Incomplete. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for self-regulation, emotional modulation, the ability to calm oneself down, it won't be functional for years. What this means in practice, at 2:47 in the morning, is this. Your baby cannot self-soothe in any neurologically meaningful sense. The equipment for it doesn't exist yet. When a stress response activates in their brain, cortisol rising, heart rate climbing, the nervous system moving toward overwhelm, there is no internal mechanism to bring it back down. None. The only regulation system a newborn has is external. It is you. When your baby cries at night and you respond, you are not spoiling them. You are functioning as the part of their brain that doesn't exist yet. But that still doesn't explain why it happens at night. Why 2 a.m. specifically? Why, on some nights, seemingly out of nowhere? For that, you need to understand something about how a newborn's internal clock works, or rather, how it doesn't. Adult human sleep operates on a circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle regulated by melatonin, light exposure, cortisol, and a cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Newborns don't have this system yet. Melatonin production in infants is negligible for the first 3 months of life. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is present but functionally immature. The cortisol rhythms that tell an adult body when to be alert and when to wind down, in a newborn, those rhythms are essentially flat. What this means is that a newborn's brain does not distinguish between night and day at the neurochemical level. Your baby isn't waking because something is wrong at 2 a.m. Your baby is waking because their brain has not yet been configured to know that 2 a.m. is different from 2 p.m. A team at the Brown Center for the Study of Children at Risk found that this circadian entrainment, the process of a baby's internal clock synchronizing to the outside world, takes a minimum of 12 weeks to begin, and in many infants, significantly longer. The crying isn't a malfunction. It's a brain in the process of learning that darkness means something. Now here is the part that contradicts almost everything you've been told. In 2019, researchers at the University of Warwick conducted a large-scale review of studies on infant sleep interventions, specifically the kind designed to reduce nighttime waking. They found something that surprised a lot of pediatric sleep specialists: sleep training methods that reduce nighttime signaling, crying it out, graduated extinction, any approach that trained babies to stop communicating distress at night, did not produce better rested, more regulated children. What they produced was quieter nights. The infants were still waking. They were still experiencing the same cortisol spikes, the same autonomic arousal. They had simply stopped signaling it. They had learned that signaling didn't work. You've heard this before, with a different species. In the 1960s, Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania demonstrated learned helplessness, the phenomenon where animals exposed to inescapable stress eventually stop trying to escape, even when escape becomes possible. The infants weren't sleeping better. They had learned that the regulation system, the external one, the only one they had, was unavailable. This is not an argument against sleep training for every family, in every situation. There are contexts where it is the right decision. But the data suggests that what looks like success, the quiet night, the baby who stopped waking, is sometimes something more complicated. Here is what the research actually looks like when you put it all together. At the moment your baby cries at night, their brain is registering what neuroscientists call a threat response. Cortisol is rising. The sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, is activating. And the system that would, in an adult, bring that response back to baseline simply does not exist. Your baby is not expressing an opinion about sleep. They are sending a distress signal to the only regulation system they have access to, you. In 2017, a research team led by Ruth Feldman at Bar-Ilan University in Israel published findings on what they called biological synchrony, the measurable physiological alignment between a caregiver and an infant during moments of contact. When a parent responds to a crying baby and makes physical contact, holds them, rocks them, speaks to them, the infant's cortisol begins to drop. Heart rate decelerates, breathing slows. But here is what makes the finding extraordinary. The same thing happens to the parent. The biological synchrony runs in both directions. The baby's nervous system regulates against the parent's, and the parent's nervous system, under the stress of a 2 a.m. wake-up, weeks of broken sleep, the weight of not knowing why, also regulates partly against the baby's. You are not just calming them. You are, in a measurable biological sense, co-regulating each other. The crying isn't a problem you failed to prevent. It's a signal that the system is working exactly as it was designed. For hundreds of thousands of years, an infant who stopped signaling need did not survive. The ones who cried, the ones whose cries were answered, are the ancestors of every person alive today. Your baby's cry at 2 a.m. is not a failure. It is the most successful biological communication system ever developed. There is one thing in all of this that does require attention, and it almost never gets mentioned. Not all nighttime crying sounds the same. Pediatric researchers at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine documented something called cry acoustics, the measurable differences in the frequency, rhythm, and duration of infant crying across different physiological states. Hunger cries have a rhythmic pattern. Colic cries are higher pitched, more sustained, resistant to soothing. Pain cries contain what researchers call hyperphonation, a sharp, sudden peak in pitch that parents across cultures respond to instinctively. What the research found is that parents are remarkably accurate at distinguishing these cry types. Even first-time parents, even exhausted parents, when they trust what they're hearing rather than overriding it with advice. Your nervous system was calibrated over millions of years of evolution to respond to an infant's cry. The instinct to pick them up, to check, to not leave it, that instinct exists for a reason. The advice that told you to ignore it was invented recently. The instinct is ancient. If something in the cry sounds different, sharper, more urgent, outside the pattern you've come to know, trust that signal. Not every cry is about regulation. Some are about pain. Some require a doctor. But the cry, the 2 a.m. cry that has been happening for weeks, that stops when you hold them, that resumes when you put them down, that one isn't a mystery. That one is your baby telling you, you're the only nervous system I have. So here is what decades of neuroscience, sleep research, and attachment studies have been quietly building toward. Your baby is not crying for no reason. They are crying because they are operating a brand new nervous system with no self-regulation architecture, in a brain that cannot yet tell night from day, sending a distress signal to the external regulation system that evolution built specifically for this moment, which is you. Holding them at 2 a.m. is not a weakness. It is not spoiling. It is not a habit you'll regret. It is, in the most literal biological sense, an act of neuroscience. You are building a brain, and the fact that they stop crying when you walk in the room, that's not them getting what they wanted. That's the system working. If this changed how you see those 2 a.m. wake-ups, subscribe and leave a comment below. Does your baby have a cry you've learned to recognize? Tell me what it sounds like.